It is no secret that The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time is one of the most popular video games in history. All it takes is a quick search on Google or YouTube and you'll find hundreds upon hundreds of reviews praising it to no end from critics and fans alike. Some would even consider it to be the greatest game ever made. After all, it paved the way forwards for the Zelda series, marking its first leap into the third dimension. When you look at the entries that came after, like Wind Waker and Twilight Princess, it's clear that a lot of their DNA can be traced back to Ocarina of Time, from their structure to their combat to their dungeon design. It didn't just influence the Zelda franchise though. Ocarina of Time was also revolutionary for the gaming industry as a whole, with its camera controls and targeting system blazing a trail for many future adventure games to follow. But 1998 was a long time ago, and things have come a long way since then. So, this has left me with one question on my mind. Does The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time stand the test of time? To me, one of Ocarina of Time's strongest aspects has to be the world it builds around you. From the childlike wonder of Kokiri Forest, to the perilous heights of Death Mountain, to the hostile sands of Gerudo Desert, this game brings such a wide variety of locales to the table. These are all tied together by the open, sprawling land that is Hyrule Field, which is, honestly, one of my favourite parts of this game. It's just so much fun to explore. Sure, when you think about it, Hyrule Field isn't actually that big here, but in spite of that, it still feels expansive. You start off in Kokiri Forest, which is a small, safe, enclosed area and is almost like a playground where you can get used to the controls and mechanics. Contrast this with Hyrule Field, which you step into almost immediately after beating the first dungeon, and it's clear that this is where your adventure has truly started. But what's a good world without good characters, right? Luckily, Ocarina of Time has these in spades too, with a huge cast of characters to talk to. The very first character you meet upon stepping out of your house is Link's childhood friend, Saria. The bond shared between these two is evident from the beginning, and you're always reminded of it throughout your journey, like how whenever you play Saria's song on your ocarina, you're always able to talk to her and seek advice. You've also got Darunia, the leader of the Gorons, who doesn't trust Link at first after a rough encounter with Ganondorf. However, when Link reopens Dodongo's cavern and clears out the monsters from the inside, Darunia sees him as a sworn brother and even goes on to name his son after Link. These are just a couple of the main characters though. The world is also packed with side characters, each with their own little stories to follow. You've got Anju, the cuckoo lady who's allergic to chickens, the carpenters who are always slacking off much to the annoyance of their boss, and even this random guard outside Death Mountain. He appears to be just an ordinary Hylian soldier like any other, but he's actually a really nice dude. He gives you a discount so you can get yourself a shield at a cheaper price, and even buys a mask off you as a gift for his son. I think now would be an appropriate time to talk about Ocarina of Time's main mechanic, which is the ability to travel through time. In this game, Link is able to skip 7 years ahead by pulling the Master Sword from its pedestal and return back to his childhood by putting it back into its place. Doing this causes the world and the characters around you to change, with the transition from childhood to adulthood marking the jump from familiarity into the unknown. Upon stepping out of the Temple of Time, the first thing you'll notice is what's happened to Castletown. This was once a peaceful and prosperous area, bustling with crowds of people, but now that couldn't be further from the case. Hyrule is now under Ganondorf's reign, and the town has become a derelict shadow of what it used to be, overrun by redeads and without a soul in sight. This isn't the only place that changes over the course of the time skip, however. Returning to Kokiri Forest reveals that it's no longer the safe haven that it once was. What's important to note here is that while Link has aged physically during the time it took for this to happen, none of the Kokiris have. This confirms that, as the player may have suspected from the beginning of the adventure, Link was never truly a Kokiri, but a Hylian entrusted into their care from a young age. One of my favourite subplots that occurs across the two time periods is the story of Lon Lon Ranch though. Initially it's run by Talon, a nice, albeit slightly lazy guy who takes good care of the horses alongside his daughter Malon. However, when you come back later, a man named Ingo who works under Ganondorf has taken over ownership. Yeah, suffice to say, he's not a great guy. He's cocky, has a massive ego, kicked Talon out of the ranch, and threatens to harm the horses if Malon doesn't obey him. This makes it all the more satisfying when you take him on in a race, beat him fair and square, and wipe that smirk off his face. Being the sore loser that he is, he locks up the ranch and prevents you from escaping, but in what is one of the coolest cutscenes of this game, you can escape by leaping over the fence with Epona. So far, I've talked a lot about the gloomy and moody locations that Ocarina of Time has to offer. To offset this, there are also some really peaceful areas where you can always just stop by to chill, unwind, and take a break. One such area is Kakariko or Kakariko Village, the main place of residence for the population of Hyrule. It's always nice to drop in and chat to the villagers here and break into their houses without their permission. Much like many of the other areas in this game, it also changes after the time skip. Since Hyrule Town gets taken over by Ganondorf in the future, the vast majority of its inhabitants end up moving to Kakariko Village, so you see them milling about and setting up shop here. The attention to detail is really nice, like how there's a construction site there as a child which becomes fully built as an adult. Zora's Domain has a really nice atmosphere as well, from the soothing music to the soft colours and the sound of the flowing water in the background. It's one of those odd places in video games that you just can't help but feel relaxed by, as if every burden has just been taken off your shoulders. For me, another stellar example of this has to be the fishing hole situated in Lake Hylia. It's just such a contained, remote location that feels so disconnected and isolated from the rest of the game, but isolated in a comforting sense rather than a lonely one. Here, you cast away your sword and instead cast a fishing line into the pond and try to reel in the heaviest fish possible. As a kid, I sank hours into this little distraction. It really lures you in, hook, line and sinker, and yeah, I'll stop with the fishing puns, but in all seriousness, it's very easy just to daydream here and get lost in the experience. I also always thought it was really neat how you could find a sinking lure around the outskirts of the pond to enhance your performance and break the rules by using it, or how you could use the rod to fish the owner's hat off and then he'd go absolutely nuts and stop you from leaving until you pay a fine. It's the little details like this that make the experience all the more immersive. The overworld in general has a lot of secrets to uncover, and generally for discovering these you're rewarded with a piece of heart. Some of these are in chests underground, while others may be hidden in plain sight and you just have to figure out how to get to them. What I particularly like about these ones is that you're given a bit of freedom as to how you can obtain them. The clearest example of this is the heart piece on top of the entrance to Dodongo's cavern. The obvious way to get this one would be to plant a magic bean in the soil outside the cavern and ride it up to the top as an adult, but you can actually bypass this completely by backflipping from the ledge just above. How about the one you get by talking to the guy on the roof in Kakariko Village? You could hookshot to the roof and get to him that way, or just climb to the top of this post and side hop to land in the perfect position. One alternative method that I only discovered recently is for the heart piece by the cow that you normally need to hitch a ride from Keiporage Bora to get to. Once again, however, you can completely skip this by just using a chicken to glide off the scaffolding of this partially constructed building as a kid and reach the ledge that way. While that one most likely wasn't intentional on the developer's parts, considering that it's quite a hassle to pull off, I really like how the game rewards you for thinking outside the box to get certain things early. Some heart pieces are obtained as prizes from certain minigames like the Bombchu Bowling Alley and the Shooting Gallery. While they can be tricky at times, seriously, I can never seem to hit the Bombchu targets on the sides of the walls. What am I doing wrong? They're a fun challenge and the music does get stuck in your head very easily. I always found it funny how the treasure box shop, which appears on the surface to be a game of chance where you have to pick between two chests, can be just completely cheesed by using the lens of truth. You're basically scamming the owner here, it's too funny. There's a lot more to do in the overworld than just collecting heart pieces though. Ocarina of Time, in fact, has two main side quests, one of which takes place as a child and the other as an adult. As a kid, you have to run errands for the Happy Mask Salesman by selling masks to people. Doing this enough times will reward you with the Mask of Truth, which lets you talk to the gossip stones littered throughout Hyrule, which in turn give you hints, advice, or just spout out random trivia. You also gain access to some other fun, cosmetic masks, including the Goron, Zora, and Gerudo masks. I always appreciated how wearing the different masks prompts unique dialogue from the NPCs, which is such good attention to detail. For example, if you talk to the Zora King while wearing the Goron mask, he'll tell you how it reminds him of his childhood friend Bigoron. Speaking of which, the second side quest, and the one that I consider to be the more compelling of the two, is a trading sequence that you do as adult Link, the Bigoron Sword quest. Basically, Bigoron, who is a Master Goron swordsmith, has gone blind, and you need to fetch some eye drops to help him out. To do this, you need to perform a convoluted trading sequence involving a blue chicken, a mushroom, a secret potion, a carpenter's saw, and other such items. Eventually, you come to acquire the broken Bigoron sword, which you then present to Bigoron. However, as he can't see, he's unable to repair the sword, so gives you a prescription for some eye drops, which you then take to the Zora King, who then gives you a frog, which the scientists working at the Lakeside Laboratory can convert to eye drops, which you have only 4 minutes to deliver to Bigoron. If you make it in time, he'll thank you for helping him out and start working on repairing the sword, which takes 3 in-game days. Finally, after all of this, you obtain the Bigoron sword, which is a massive two-handed weapon that does double the damage of the Master Sword. You really have to work for it, but it is such an amazing payoff for all the effort you have to put in. Like, I just can't overstate how much damage this thing does. That's enough about the side dishes though, let's move on to the main course. The dungeons are always one of the highlights of a classic 3D Zelda game, and Ocarina of Time is no exception to the rule. It starts off strongly with the Deku Tree, which I think sets a solid example for the rest of the temples to follow. It's a relatively simple layout to understand for a newcomer and provides a nice environment in which the player can learn about the mechanics that are featured in future dungeons. I am a big fan of some of the puzzles as well, like how when you defeat a Deku Scrub, he gives you a hint for later on in the dungeon, telling you that 23 is number 1. At first, this seems like meaningless flavor text, but at one stage you'll reach a room with 3 Deku Scrubs guarding the boss door. In order to open said door, you'll need to defeat them in a specific order, which is, you guessed it, 2, 3, 1. Sure, it's pretty basic when you lay it out like that, but this is the first dungeon after all. Overall, the Deku Tree serves its purpose and it serves it well, and as a bonus, if you're a veteran player, you can blitz through it in about 10 minutes, so it never gets tedious on a replay. Where things start getting really good, however, is in the second dungeon, Dodongo's Cavern. A lot of the puzzles revolve around the main, central room which you return to at several points. This kind of structure has had a pretty clear influence on other Zelda entries, with similar concepts being seen in the Ancient Cistern and Temple of Droplets, just to name a couple. At first, there's only really one way you can go, but eventually you'll find bombs, the main item of the temple. These allow you to open up more passageways in the main room, and eventually you'll come back again, except this time at a higher level. Here, you walk along a bridge and drop bombs in the eyes of the massive Dodongo statue that's been staring you in the face the whole time, which opens up its mouth, revealing a door to the rest of the dungeon. This is a brilliant set piece, and Dodongo's Cavern has a lot of great spectacles like this. For example, there's a room where you have to place a bomb to cause a chain reaction of explosions to form a staircase. Now, probably the biggest jump in difficulty of Ocarina of Time's dungeons can be found after you become an adult. The one that sets this trend into motion is the Forest Temple, which has to be up there as one of my favourites. One of the main things I've got to mention here is the music. When combined with the aesthetics, it creates this mystical atmosphere and entices you to carry on exploring, and the best part is that it actually sounds eerily similar to normal when played backwards. As for the dungeon itself, it doesn't disappoint. When you first enter, you're greeted with a short cutscene where you see 4 different coloured post sisters in the centre of a room who then take off in different directions. As you navigate through the different passageways, you'll encounter a bunch of rooms, like a twisted corridor that you have to straighten using a switch, and one with a checkerboard pattern on the floor. Here, the ceiling starts to fall down, and you need to watch the shadows cast onto the floor to know where you'll be safe to stand. Eventually, you'll reach these rooms with portraits of the different Poes, which you have to shoot with your bow to initiate fights with them. You take them out one by one, and each time you do this, one of the 4 torches in the main room lights up, until you only have the 4th and final sister left. When you return back to the central room, the final Poe reveals herself, and you take her on in a fun mini-boss battle. Doing so ignites the final flame, which reveals an elevator, allowing you to reach the final stretch of the dungeon. This is a fantastic example of a Zelda dungeon done right, and naturally, Ocarina of Time is home to many more of those. I'm also a really big fan of the Spirit Temple, which is the only dungeon that requires both the child and adult forms to complete. You see, you can only initially reach the dungeon as an adult by wandering through the haunted wastelands. When you go in, however, you'll find a hole that's too small for Link to crawl through in his adult form. At this point, you can't really do anything, so you leave the dungeon where you're greeted by Sheik, who teaches you the Requiem of Spirits, a song that lets you walk back to the Desert Colossus at any time. What you then have to do is re-enter the temple as a kid and complete about half of it until you acquire the Silver Gauntlets, basically a strength upgrade that lets you lift larger blocks than normal. The issue is that you can't use them as a child, so you have to transform into an adult, return to the dungeon once more, and clear the rest of it with your newfound strength. The main item you find here is the Mirror Shield, which is used for some pretty creative light reflection puzzles. This has got to be the most clever use of the time travel mechanic in the entire game. Seeing it so thoroughly integrated into the design of a dungeon is pretty incredible. What's interesting is that Ocarina of Time is also host to an optional dungeon, namely the Gerudo Training Facility. What I really like about this one is that it presents the end goal to you right from the get-go. You'll pretty quickly get to a room consisting of a series of locked doors and bars, and in the middle of it all lies a big chest. The idea is that you need to go around the dungeon solving various puzzles and defeating different types of enemies using the wide variety of items you've gathered on your journey. Some of these are really clever, with the one that sticks out in my mind being the room where you have to use a combination of the long shot and the lens of truth to find a secret alcove. With each room that you clear, you'll find a key, which allows you to get closer and closer to the big chest. Inside, you'll find the ice arrows, which, while not needed to beat the game, are still a really cool reward. Get it? Because ice? Cool? Yeah, I'll stop. I think it's impossible to talk about Ocarina of Time's dungeons without addressing the elephant in the room though. Of course what I'm referring to is the Water Temple, which has become infamous in the gaming community for its frustrating nature and its water level mechanics. One of the biggest criticisms people have with it is that you'll often have to switch between your Kokiri and Iron boots, which wouldn't really be an issue if boots were an equipable item like most of the things in this game. The problem arises from the fact that to switch boots, you have to open the pause menu every time, which admittedly does get very tedious very fast. Then there's the issue that you always seem to be missing one key, which blocks you from progressing any further. The strangest part is that a vast majority of players were missing the exact same key. During a cutscene where the water level is rising, you might notice a platform rising up along with it. Just under said platform is a hole that you can go into to find the key, but the problem is that it's very easy to miss the hole being revealed if you're not paying close attention. I have a funny story about this from when I was a kid actually. You see, I had no issue finding the room, but that's not all you have to do. To claim the key, you have to fend off a bunch of clams, and, well, I got completely bodied by them. After that, I stopped playing for a while, and then when I fired the game back up again, I'd completely forgotten about that room and got stuck. If you can look past these, admittedly frustrating issues, however, you're actually left with a pretty nice dungeon. The changing water levels are used for some interesting puzzles, and there are a few standout moments as well, like where you have to use your long shot to climb up platforms cascading down a waterfall, or perhaps my favourite part of the dungeon, the mini-boss. Here you take on a recurring foe from the Zelda series, Dark Link. Honestly, I just love the way this battle is set up. The setting is just very mysterious. You enter a room full of shallow waters with a small, isolated tree in the middle. It appears to be outdoors, which is a stark contrast to the rest of the dungeon, so it immediately tells you that this is no ordinary room. At first, it seems like there's nothing of note in there, and the exit is blocked off, so you turn around. What an eagle-eyed player would notice at this point is that Link's reflection has disappeared, and then when you return to the tree, there's Dark Link waiting for you under it. This is easily one of the best mini-boss entrances of all time, and the fight itself doesn't disappoint either. Fighting Dark Link is like fighting yourself. Try to take him on with a Master Sword and he can anticipate your every move, dodging, blocking, and counter-attacking anything you throw at him. Try hard enough and you can break through his defenses using this method, but if you want to be more efficient, it's all about being resourceful and using every advantage you have over him. Sure, he can match your swordplay with ease, but does he have a Megaton Hammer? No. Does he have Deku Nuts? Nope. Does he have Din's Fire? No siree. Using the items that you have makes this showdown significantly easier, and it's so rewarding to take him down once and for all. When the battle is done and dusted, your surroundings morph from the outdoor oasis you are dueling in to just an ordinary room. There are a few other fun mini-bosses like the giant Octorok in Jabu Jabu's belly or the Iron Knuckles in the Spirit Temple, which are always a tough challenge. Where Ocarina of Time really shines, however, is in its main bosses, and man, where do you even begin? Volvagia is always a good time and is essentially an old-fashioned classic game of whack-a-mole, except the mole is an evil fire dragon. Twin Rover is also a fun one, where you have to take on two witches, Kotake and Kume, who have ice and fire powers respectively. You need to use the dungeon's item, the Mirror Shield, to reflect attacks from one witch into the other until they fuse mid-battle and you have to take on their combined powers. Aside from the final boss though, the Phantom Ganon fight in the Forest Temple has to be the best one in my opinion. In a near replica of the cutscene where Impa and Zelda are being chased out of the castle, you see what appears to be Ganondorf riding towards you. However, it turns out that this is just a clone created by the main man to hold you up, but even then, it's definitely one of the tougher challenges you face on your quest. It lets you get some practice swings in for the tennis match that is the Dead Man's Volley, a staple of the Zelda series. This prepares you for when you have to face the real thing in the endgame. After clearing every room in Ganondorf's castle, defeating every enemy he tries to throw at you and scaling all the way up his tower, you finally confront him in a spectacular showdown. Once again, you need to be on your toes as you engage in the most extreme game of tennis that you've ever experienced. Sure, the Phantom Ganon match was pretty tricky, but this takes it to the next level. As you get further into the fight, Ganondorf will slam his fist into the ground, causing the arena around you to crumble, and use this massive attack that you can only reflect back using a perfectly timed spin attack. Do this enough times and it's game, set, and match. At last, it's all over. Or so it seems. As it turns out, Ganondorf has one last trick up his sleeve as he causes the castle to collapse around him in a last-ditch effort. This leads to an awesome segment where you have to follow Zelda and rush down to the bottom of the tower in a race against time. This sequence is so intense, the stakes are high, and it always seems like just when you're getting close, another obstacle appears to stand in your way. After all that stress, the relief you feel upon escaping is immense, and finally, it's all over. Except it's not, because Ganondorf is not finished yet, oh no. With his Triforce of Power, he uses the last of his strength to transform into the giant monster that is Ganon for one truly final battle. The atmosphere around this climactic ending is unparalleled. You've got the gloomy sky, the raging flames that surround you, the flashes of lightning, and the music. It's not particularly high energy or dramatic like the rest of the boss themes you hear in this game, rather it feels almost solemn and dark, which perfectly conveys the idea that the fate of Hyrule rests in your hands. With every hit you take, you hear Zelda's screams in the background and take a ridiculous amount of damage, so this is no easy fight. However, with enough grit and determination, you'll eventually manage to take him down once and for all, using your Master Sword to deal the final blow. The influence that The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time has had on the gaming industry is undeniable. It's heralded as an undisputed classic, and deservedly so. Sure, the story plays it relatively safe and there are some slight rough edges, but ultimately, those are just minor nitpicks in an otherwise excellent, genre-defining game. It's 3D Zelda at its purest, and for that reason, it's the one I'll always recommend to people looking to get into the series. While it might not be my absolute favourite Zelda entry of all time, I can still safely say that it holds a special place in my heart. Thinking about it, it's probably the single game that I've played through from start to finish the most times, and I always find comfort in doing so. Sure, my view is somewhat influenced by the nostalgia I hold, but even when you look past that, I think it can't be argued that The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time still stands the test of time.